Hey guys, this is Benny Ricciardi with rotocurve.com, and I'm here with our Benny's Bat section for today, Monday, August 24th. The idea of the Benny's Bat section is we try to take a look at every pitcher that's on the mound, figure out what their weaknesses are, and then figure out which bats are in the best spot to take advantage of those weaknesses. We don't have a big slate today. I think we only have 11 games going on for the 7 o'clock slate, so let's get right into it. The first guy on the mound I want to talk about is Buck Farmer. Now, Farmer was a big prospect, but so far he's been getting lit up in his major league experience. Left-handed bats are hitting .385 against him with 3 home runs and 11 innings pitched, and right-handed bats are hitting .308 against him with 3 home runs and 13 innings pitched. So the one guy who stands out the most to me on this Cincinnati team against him today is going to be Joey Votto. Votto has a .416 WOBA, .241 ISO number. You know, again, he's been struggling with left-handed bats to a .385 batting average, so Votto is definitely the top guy that's at play. Now, against right-handed pitching, there's not a ton of bats on the Cincinnati team that really stand out based on the numbers. But Farmer has been that bad that I think basically all these guys are going to be in play today. So if you want to look at a guy like, Todd Frazier, even though he's been struggling, Eugenio Suarez, who's actually been playing very well lately, Brandon Phillips, you got to see who else is up towards the top of that order. Maybe guys like Brian Pena, Jay Bruce, if he's in there. All these guys are guys that look like they're going to be in a good spot today. Farmer hasn't been able to get anybody out. Everybody's been hitting him. They've been hitting him hard. So I definitely think that this is a good game you want to stack up because he has struggled against right-handed and left-handed batters. So it really doesn't matter who you roll out there against him. You should be able to get some good upside going against him today. Next guy we want to talk about on the other side of that game is Kavius Sampson. Left-handed bats are hitting .324 against him with a 1.98 whip. Now, he hasn't been up in the majors long, so it is limited innings pitched, but it is something that, you want to be concerned with. There aren't a lot of left-handed bats on that Detroit team that you really want to target, but there are a couple guys who are very good in righty-on-righty matchups. You got a guy like Miguel Cabrera with a .446 WOBA, .233 ISO score. JD Martinez obviously hits right-handed pitching well, .385 WOBA, .270 ISO. So they would be the two guys that I would look to roll out there on that team. Again, I think you want to be targeting the other side of this game a little bit more. The way Buck Farmer's been pitching, it's a good chance he's going to get lit up. So I think I'd rather have Cincinnati bats than Detroit bats, but I do think that both sides of this game are going to be in play. Next guy we can talk about, Adam Morgan, pitching for the Phillies. Morgan is a left-hander. Right-handed bats have hit .273 against him with 8 home runs in 45 innings. He goes up against the Mets team, who's been absolutely on fire. But again, they were playing in Coors Field. They moved to Philadelphia, which is still a pretty good hitter's ballpark for them. A couple guys that we want to make sure we take a look at on this team. You have, Wilmer Flores with a .375 WOBA, .224 ISO score. David Wright is actually going to be making his comeback today. I don't know if he's going to be starting, but they said that he's back up with the big club come Monday, so he should be a guy that you take a look at. He always smashes left-handed pitching pretty well. So right from the right side, I think is somebody you want to look at. Guys like Yoenis Cespedes, even though he hasn't hit left-handed pitching that well this year, he's usually not somebody who's this bad against left-handed pitching, as his numbers suggest. We got Jose Uribe, if he's in there. Michael Kadire, he's another guy you can look at. I'm not sure who's going to be playing first base. They just put Lucas Duda on DL, so I think you got to look at a guy like Kadire who might be playing first base for them today. If he's playing first base, that also means there's some outfield positions open, so maybe you get like a Juan Lagares in the outfield. Again, take a look at the lineup when it comes out here today. Adam Morgan is somebody I think you can target against, especially playing in Citizens Bank Park in Philly. So I think you can look at some of these Mets bats today, specifically the right-handers if you can. Next guy I want to talk about, Felix Doubront. Doubront is pitching for Oakland. Right-handed bats have done better against him, but to be perfectly honest, his numbers are not that bad. He actually looks pretty solid, but there are some guys on that Seattle team that do very well against left-handed pitching. Nelson Cruz is the top guy that stands out, .479 WOBA, .339 ISO, so he's definitely somebody you have to consider. And Franklin Gutierrez as a cheap option. He's been hitting really, really well lately. He's batting in the 5 hole in that order. So you got Cruz in the 3 spot, you got Cano in the 4 spot, and then Franklin Gutierrez is hitting right behind him. So he does have some good bats in front of him that have been getting on base. He has a .428 WOBA and a .309 ISO so far. So I think he's another guy that you can look at in this matchup. We have Chris Medlin pitching for Kansas City. Now, he's basically hasn't had a start in a major league since I think about 2013. He's had a few relief pitcher innings appearances so far this year for Kansas City, and he's been all right. Left-handed bats have hit 273 against him. He's been pretty tough on righties. So if you're going to look at anybody, now remember, here's the other thing, though. He's probably only going to pitch about 5 or 6 innings. He's been pitching about 2 or 3 innings in relief, so they are still stretching him out a little bit, and I don't expect him to have his usual game. I mean, he was a guy who was a pretty solid pitcher a couple years back, somebody who was definitely on people's radars before he got injured, and he's finally back up in the major leagues. The problem I have here is, like I said, left-handed bats are probably the way to go against them, but you also know that Kansas City team has a really good bullpen. So even if he does only go 5 innings, you're probably going to get 4 innings against one of the strongest bullpens in the league. So I wouldn't go too crazy taking bats in this game. Gerardo Parra, somebody who stands out, though, 373 WOBA, 250 ISO number since coming over to Baltimore. His numbers were about at those levels when he was on Milwaukee earlier in the year as well. So it's something that, he's had a track record of all season. You also have a guy like Chris Davis, 370 WOBA, 291 ISO number, has a lot of power, is in a good hitter's ballpark. But actually, no, this game's in Kansas City, so it's not in a good hitter's ballpark. Not looking for a big home run day out of him. But again, you do want to look at the left-handed bats in this situation. Next guy we can talk about, Scott Feldman. Feldman is a right-handed pitcher, but he's actually struggled more with right-handed bats, who are hitting 302 against him with 8 home runs in 48 innings. The only guy righty on the Yankee team who you really want to consider would be Alex Rodriguez, 344 WOBA, 202 ISO number. You could also look, I think, at some of those left-handed bats. Even though Feldman's been worse against righties, I think some of those lefties could be in play too. So guys like Ellsbury and Gardner on top of the order, maybe a guy like a Beltran or a McCann. Depending on the price, I think these are some other guys that you can look at, although I wouldn't be looking to go crazy heavy targeting them. I do like the left-handed bats because they are at home in Yankee Stadium, especially the guys that have a little bit of power. I don't think Feldman's a very good pitcher, and I do think that the Yankees are going to be able to get to him. I just don't know if this is a game that I want to target very heavily. Next guy we talk about, J.A. Happ. Happ has allowed right-handed bats to hit 277 against him with 11 homers in 84 innings. And left-handed bats are actually hitting 287 with less opportunity because he is a left-handed pitcher, so he sees a lot more of those right-handed bats. Guys on Miami that profile well, Martin Prado and Marcelo Zuna, both of these guys have been pretty hot lately. So I think those are 2 guys that you can look at. There's nobody that really stands out on the numbers, but those would be 2 of the guys that I would look to target. Even if you wanted to go after some of the guys like maybe a D. Gordon or an Ichiro Suzuki, I think that those guys could be in play too, getting on base on top of that order and letting some of the big bats behind them drive them in. Next guy we can talk about is Joe Kelly. Joe Kelly is an interesting case here because he has 3 really, really good starts in a row after being really, really bad for about a month and a half before that. There's really not a lot of guys I want to target. Left-handed bats are hitting 307 against him with 8 home runs in 48 innings. The only left-handed bat with good numbers on the Chicago White Sox, though, is Adam Eaton. 355 WOBA, 172 ISO. Doesn't have a lot of power, but he does get on base, gets a couple hits, can steal a base for you, score a couple runs. But again, I don't see a ton of upside with using a guy like Eaton, although he is in a pretty good spot here. But remember, Kelly's been tough lately. So again, it's not a game you really want to go out of your way to target. You can look at Jose Abreu. He's got the best numbers in righty on righty matchups. 384 WOBA for him, 233 ISO number. The game is at Boston and Fenway Park, which has been yielding a decent amount of hits and runs. So I think you could try to get some of these guys in your lineup if you want, but I don't think that it's another game that I want to target very heavily. Next guy we can talk about, Tom Kohler for Miami. Left-handed bats are only hitting 241 against him, which is actually his better split. But he has allowed 13 home runs in 72 innings pitched. Looking at that Pittsburgh team, I mean, you got a guy like Gregory Polanco, who's a left-handed bat that's been leading off. He's been hitting much better since the All-Star break, so he's somebody you can consider. Cheap option at second base, Neil Walker might be a guy that you want to put in play. Again, neither one of these guys have huge numbers on the year, but they are the 2 guys who profile to do the best against them. The guy with the best numbers in righty-on-righty matchups for them is Andrew McCutchen, 384 WOBA, 221 ISO number. You could also look at a guy like Young Ho Kang. He's got about a 355 WOBA or 360 WOBA and a .200 ISO score. He did have 2 home runs the other day, so it looks like he's seeing the ball well, and he's been hitting well lately. In the middle of that order, is going to have a chance to drive some runs in. So that's about everything I would look at from this game. But again, it's not a good hitter's park here, so I'm not really looking to target a lot of these bats either. We got Robbie Ray. Robbie Ray has allowed right-handed bats to hit .260 against him with the 132 whip, which, again, aren't huge numbers, but it's the best ones that we have on the day. The only guy who really stands out to me on that Cardinals team is Johnny Peralta. Peralta's got a 351 WOBA, 252 ISO number. He does hit pretty well against left-handed pitching, and he is probably their biggest power bat at this point in time from the right side against the left-hander. We got Nathan Eovaldi, who left-handed bats have hit 325 against him with the 173 whip, and that's really bad because at home in Yankee Stadium, you know, those left-handed bats are going to have a good chance to take him to the short porch. Couple guys that we can look at here. You know, you got a guy like Jose Altuve, who's a pretty solid little hitter. Righty on righty, he's not as good as he is against left-handers, but he is somebody that's in play. You can look at Carlos Correa, who's probably got the best numbers against right-handers for a righty on righty split. But again, Eovaldi's been pretty tough on the righty, so I don't know if you want to look at him. If you want to look at some of the bats from the left side, which is where Eovaldi's really struggled, Preston Tucker's the one who stands out the most based on his stats. I'm not sure if he's going to be in there. He's been a little banged up lately, so he might not be playing. Luis Valbuena, you can look at. He's another guy that had a hot start to the season, but has really cooled off after that. And to be honest, there aren't too many other guys. I mean, I think Jed Lowry's a switch hitter, so maybe you want to look at Lowry in this game. But as much as I would like to target some lefties against Eovaldi, there's really nobody on this Houston team that's jumping out at me as saying, you know, this is a guy whose numbers make sense. Let's see. We got Jeff Samardzija pitching against the Boston Red Sox up in Fenway Park. Left-handed bats have hit 275 against him with 14 home runs in 82 innings pitched. So I definitely think you got to look at a guy like David Ortiz. 404 WOBA, 285 ISO. Definitely a top option at first base today. Somebody I think you should have in some of your lineups. Alejandro De Aza, who's been hitting up towards the top of that order against right-handed pitching. He's got a 385 WOBA, 208 ISO since coming over to the Red Sox. So those would be the two guys who I think stand out the most. You also got guys like Mookie Betts, who basically just came back and has gone back on top of the order. He's been kind of hot. He's been getting a lot of hits lately, doing pretty well. So he's somebody I think you can consider as well in this situation. Let's see. Next guy, Jorge De La Rosa against Atlanta. I'm going to be honest. Left-handed bats do better against De La Rosa. I don't like anybody on this Atlanta team. There's nobody whose numbers stick out. There's nobody who I want to mention. I think that might be a mistake, but De La Rosa's actually been a lot better on the road too. So I think there's a lot of things that are kind of going against Atlanta and in De La Rosa's favor. You know, like I said, I mean, I looked at it. I tried to figure out who I was going to tell you guys to play or guys who I think are in good spots, and I really don't see any. And rather than force it, I'm just going to tell you guys, I don't know if I would use De La Rosa. I don't know if I have that kind of faith in him. But I definitely don't think that Atlanta's in a good spot here. I don't think there's a lot of Atlanta bats that I want to be putting in my lineups. Let's see. We got Ubaldo Jimenez going up against Kansas City. He's actually been worse to right-handed bats, kind of a reverse splits guy this year. 270 batting average, 144 whip, 6 home runs in 64 innings. Left-handers are only hitting 245 against him with 10 home runs in 71 innings. So lefties have shown more power, but right-handers have been getting on base more. I think there are a couple guys against right-handed pitching who do pretty well that you can look at. A guy like Eric Hosmer, 403 WOBA, 204 ISO. He's been pretty hot lately, so he's someone that's interesting to me. Second base option, Ben Zobrist, 388 WOBA, 173 ISO, so he's another guy. You know, I think you can roll out both of those guys if you wanted to. Neither one of them is cheap, so it's going to cost you if you want to pay up for them. But I think both guys are in pretty good spots. Next guy I want to talk about, Julio Teheran. Left-handed bats hitting 298 against him with 10 homers in 66 innings this year. There are left-handed bats I want to roll out against him on Colorado. Even though Colorado is not playing at home, they do have some of those left-handed bats that are, you know, pretty solid, and I think are going to give Teheran trouble. Carlos Gonzalez is the one on top of the order who I like the most. Had another good game yesterday, hit a home run, 415 WOBA, 328 ISO number. He's been absolutely on fire since the All-Star break, so I think Carlos Gonzalez is a good option for you to look at. A guy like Charlie Blackmon on top of that order, 375 WOBA, 186 ISO. Again, he's got about 15 home runs and 30 stolen bases. He can rack up points in a lot of different ways for fantasy. So I think he's another guy that you can look at here against a guy who struggles against left-handed batters. And the third guy is Ben Paulson, 359 WOBA, 211 ISO. Like him a lot better at home. His numbers are a lot better at home, but he is a cheap option that can get you some exposure to a left-handed bat against Teheran. So if you can find him cheap on whatever site you're playing, I think he's a guy that you might want to consider using. Let's see. Next guy that's up there, we got Lance Lynn going up against this Arizona team. This is actually a pretty tricky matchup. Left-handed bats are only hitting 253, or hitting 253 against Lynn, which is his worst split. So I guess a guy like David Peralta would be in play, 380 WOBA, 234 ISO. You could probably also look at a guy like Ender and Ciarte, who's leading off for them lately. He's been playing pretty well. He's been getting on base. He's been getting a couple hits, and he's the engine that drives the top of that order. So those would be the two guys who I think from the left side you want to look at. Arizona does have some guys with good numbers in righty-on-righty matchups as well, though. Goldie's 414, 229. Wellington Castillo, 377, 280. He hit another home run yesterday. AJ Pollock is 367, 182. Now, I know I mentioned a lot of names here on this Arizona team, and there are a lot of guys whose numbers are pretty good. Arizona's offense has been on fire. I think since the All-Star break, they have one of the top 5 WOBAs of any team in the entire league. But again, Lance Lynn is not a bad pitcher. So this is a case where you have a really good offense going up against a pretty solid pitcher. So I don't know which side of this game I really want to take. I don't think I'm going to be taking Lynn on the mound today, but I also don't know if I want a ton of Arizona bats in my lineup. So, you know, depending on how you feel about that situation, I'm not going to tell you how to do it. I just don't think that it's the best spot for the Arizona bats or for Lynn. So this is a game that I'm not really targeting, but I'm not also targeting against him. Next guy we have up is Hisashi Iwakuma. Left-handed bats have actually done better against him with the 248 batting average and 7 homers in 30 innings pitched. This Oakland offense has been really bad lately. You know, Reddick and Vogt are still the two guys who stand out, but their WOBAs are down right around 360. ISO score for Reddick is 194. ISO score for Vogt is 221. You know, the big thing with all these ISO scores and WOBAs that I want you guys to understand is they're a season average, and both of these guys had WOBAs and ISO numbers that were much higher than they are now. Reddick and Vogt have been really, really bad lately, and the rest of the Oakland offense has been as well. You might want to look at a guy like maybe a Mark Canha. You know, he's been hitting pretty well lately. They have moved him up in the order, but again, it's not a great spot. I don't really love anybody on this Oakland team. They're up at Seattle. Seattle's a tough ballpark to hit in, and Iwakuma is a guy who has been able to keep guys off balance throughout his career. So again, I just don't see a ton of upside in going heavy in this game. I don't want a lot of Oakland bats in my lineup, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't know if I'll have any of them in my lineup, but you know, it is another game I wanted to mention. Last game on the day, last guy pitching, you got Jacob deGrom going up against the Phillies. Phillies offense has been hot, but Jacob deGrom has been one of the best pitchers in the game so far this year. Literally, legitimately one of the best pitchers in the game, bar none. Right-handed bats are hitting 172 against him, so no right-handed bats are in play at all. And even left-handed bats only hitting 220 against them. So I don't really think you want to, roll out a ton of guys here. If you're playing on a site where Andres Blanco's still cheap, maybe he's somebody you want to consider. If you're looking to hopefully catch lightning in a bottle and get a home run from a lefty, which deGrom has given up a couple home runs to lefties, maybe Ryan Howard's a guy that you roll out. But again, I think deGrom is going to be one of the highest owned pitchers. So if you're playing in a tournament, it might make sense to try to roll some of these guys out, because if deGrom is 60, 70% owned in, some of the tournaments that you're playing in, which again, on a short slate like this today, without a lot of pitching options, I know that number sounds high, but I wouldn't be shocked to see it. If you do roll out some of these Philly bats and deGrom does have a bad start, you're going to be ahead of a lot of the fields. But again, it's strictly a tournament play because it's very high, it's very unlikely to happen, basically. Even though that Philly team has been hitting pretty well lately, I don't see deGrom getting lit up today by the Philadelphia Phillies. So I don't really think there's a lot of Phillies bats at all that I want to target. So that pretty much wraps it up for our Benny's Bat section today. Remember, if you have any questions, come over to the RotoCurve forum. You can sign up at rotocurve.com, start earning your curve points. You can trade them in for money to play on the sites, tickets to sporting events, even some nice RotoCurve swag that, we've been wearing on the show the last couple of days to show you guys what it looks like. if you need to, you can follow me on Twitter at BennyR11. I'm always available for questions. Or you can follow RotoCurve at RotoCurve and shoot a question over there. Either myself, Josh, or Mike Rathburn will be around to answer them for you. That pretty much sums it up today for our Benny's Bat section. Thank you guys for joining us. And as always, stay classy, DFS.